have Gene Kim, who is the founder of the DevOps Enterprise Summit. He is a CTO known for Tripwire for 13 years, which is probably where I first knew about you. A researcher and a thought leader on bridging the gap between technology and business, between IT operations and leadership. And I can't say enough about that because Gene is one of those people who he produced a book, which I think was probably in certain ways almost more important than some of the technically written books that he was involved with. And it was called The Phoenix Project. And it was a story. It was an amazing story. And it was about somebody involved in this world of, enterprise IT, which doesn't sound romantic or sexy at all to most people. But it was a very personal story, which was interesting. And at the same time, it talked about very severe technical problems that a company was having in an environment where the world around was changing for technology. And as I say, it was an amazingly engaging story about a person who was trying to find his own way, number one, and help his company find its way beyond what was going to be a complete, disaster because they just were so stuck in their ways. And that was from top to bottom. That was from administration all the way down to the people who were sitting and writing code because that's what they were, heads down hired to do in the shop. So the other side of what was very good about it is that it gave this both a very big overview of the entire world and a granular a deep dive in selected places. So a couple of years later, this book, right, called The Unicorn Project.
Dean, I can't tell you how delighted and how much it warms my heart to see all those sticky notes. It's so great.
Well, because it calls out to me as someone who works with the people in these environments, and to be able to find the language that will allow them to connect and also hopefully inspire. So you've done I think a very good job of that. And so my first question, I'm going to plunge right in. Why rewrite the book? Because I'm going to give away, right, as a spoiler. It's the same story, okay? It's the same premise at the same time. Yeah. It's not a sequel and it's not a prequel. It's the same story, basically, but from a different perspective. So why don't you tell me a little about that?
Yeah, and so right, so it is Parts Unlimited. Parts Unlimited. This company that is featured in the Phoenix Project, and it happens in the present day. And the Unicorn Project is also about Parts Unlimited, and it too happens, in the present day. And it doesn't say exactly what year it is, but hopefully it's relevant, regardless of what year you're reading it. And I think there's a category of books like Ender's Shadow, where it's a story is told from a different perspective. And so that's kind of the technique I used for this book, which was instead of the story being told by the VP of IT operations, Bill Palmer, who was a protagonist in the Phoenix Project, this is told through the eyes of Maxine Chambers, the most senior developer and architect they have, who is exiled, to the Phoenix Project as punishment for her alleged role in helping cause a payroll failure. That also happened in the Phoenix Project, and so this is like being exiled to Antarctica, where someone needs to be blamed, and that's kind of the culture that is kind of taking over Parts Unlimited. And she is, the reason why she's horrified to be there is that no one can do anything by themselves, right? Developers can't get builds done. To write features, you have to deal with 4 teams or maybe 40 teams if you count the infrastructure people. There's change advisory boards, there's functional silos, there's ticketing systems that you have to navigate all your work through. And this is kind of this desolate, barren place where no one can get done what they need to get done. And and like Maxine's not happy about that, right? And she meets with this group of rebellion, the rebels, the rebellion. It's people who are trying to liberate developers, recreate kind of an engineering culture. And this is very much inspired by and dedicated to the work of the DevOps enterprise community. I mean, these are the stories of courageous leaders, working often against very powerful orthodoxies, very powerful functional silos who have no interest in changing. And so this is, really was a vehicle to be able to share those amazing stories and the genuine business value they create. And maybe just one more thing I'll add is that the book was also intended to explore a couple things that have really bothered me over the last 5 years in terms of like trying to understand what does it take for large complex organizations to really truly adopt better ways of working. And one is that there's all these invisible structures that we need in order for developers to be productive, right? So, and some might call it architecture, right? But some might call it, this is the result of, technical debt. So like we fully explore that concept. Secondly, want to explore, what are the behaviors we need from leaders to support this kind of work, and what is actively in the way, and maybe just as harmful as directly challenging and resisting a new way of working. So one of the examples, like Chris, the VP of R&D, he is, he's not happy about kind of all these changes that Maxine and Kurt want, and there's these scenes where he's like, "Oh my gosh, what have you done now?" Right? He views it as annoyance and more trouble, and so I'd like to have that. I just am giddy at the notion that as companies have book clubs around the book, they're like, "Is our leader a Chris, or are they more like Kurt and Maxine? And who are we?" Right? And then. The other thing I wanted to explore was, just the whole notion of data, right? It's like, just like the DevOps movement identified that we couldn't get code to where it needed to go, which is in production, right? So that customers can get value. We have the same problem, this orthogonal problem, like how do we get data to where it needs to go? It's trapped in systems of records, data warehouses, these very brittle systems, and it takes months, quarters to get them to where it needs to go, which is in the hands of developers so they can use it in their daily work. And that's part of learning, right? And part of the UX process is we need to make informed decisions about how we solve problems. And so it was a delight to sort of overlay that problem, bring that really central to the Unicorn project.
Right. Well, I think I also I want to go back to and deep dive a little bit. You have these 5 ideals, and I'm going to specify what they are in just a second. But again, one of the things that I really liked about that book and this book is this desire on your part, I believe, and you can verify, or not, but this idea that engineers and engineering and IT is somehow this mystical land that is divorced from the business process and sales and marketing and all the rest of the hardcore stuff, unless maybe you're a Google or an Amazon or something like that. And I like that you had taken on this legacy company that manufactured products, hard goods, and worked with brick and mortar stores first and foremost. So, so that's something I want to point out as why I found extra valuable to be able to refer to the storytelling in this, because you bring in this, the larger real world of the current state of the way that business and people have to operate within business. So.
Yeah, I think that is. I'll share with you the preconceived notions I have about why that's so important. That there are too many. I think the dismissible idea is that none of this is important because we're not a Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, Google, Microsoft, right? So this does not matter to us, and that should be on the surface like a laughable conclusion. Because software is a competency that needs to be created in every organization, and if it's software, if it's not software, it's data, and data is a software endeavor, and so so much of this work came from studying the DevOps enterprise community, and there's no doubt in my mind that the largest brands in every industry vertical and government agencies and not-for-profits, they are adopting these patterns so that they can survive and win in the marketplace, or if you're a not-for-profit, they're doing it to better serve their constituencies or achieve the mission. And if you, and there's no doubt in my mind that when the 18 million developers, of which only 1 million are at the Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, Googles, when we can get 18 million developers as productive as if they were at a Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, Google, I mean, that will generate trillions of dollars of economic value per year, right? And that will dwarf the value creation that the FANGs have created. So, and that'll be great for society as well. So, and I think one of the decisions made around the Unicorn Project was that the main character is a developer. That the book is not about the bridge crew, which I guess was more of the world of Bill Palmer, the VP of IT operations in the Phoenix Project. This is really about the red shirts on the front lines, doing the daily work, right, every day. And one of my aspirations is to show that, they might be the most important people in the organization. If our aspirations are to be digitally relevant or whatever, right, to get close to the customer, to better take them on the journey that they need to go on, and for us to thrive as a company, is how much of the value creation is done by developers. And so this is not something that we can dismiss or delegate away. So that's one of the things I'm hoping that the Unicorn Project will help advance that discussion. And the 5 ideals was just a way to be able to show a non-technologist what is important. The first one is like locality and simplicity. Can we do our work, with autonomy, or do we need, to work with 20 or 200 other people to do even the smallest thing because everything's so scattered? Second one is, when we can work with locality and simplicity, it leads to a sense of focus, flow, and joy. So, and flow in this case is not necessarily just the flow of the work and process in a manufacturing plant, but maybe flow as framed by Dr. Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. So he wrote this amazing book about these amazing states we get in when we love our work, we lose sense of time, or maybe even sense of self, right? And that's that's a great day, right? And that's what leads to employee engagement and organizational performance and world-class, world-beating organizations. Third is we can't get there unless if we prioritize improvement of daily work even above daily work itself. And so that kind of showed up in the Phoenix Project as well. Fourth, the psychological safety. I mean, we know from State of DevOps report that spans 30,000 respondents, the project auction from Google, everything suggests that what makes great teams great requires psychological safety. That was the number one factor found in the project auction study at Google. And then fifth is customer focus. The ideal is we are working on things that matter to our customers, that they're willing to pay for, that create lasting, durable business advantage. And if we're not, then maybe we got to question whether we should be working on it at all. Right. And so that's the notion of Geoffrey Moore's core versus context. Core is what creates lasting, durable business advantage. Context is everything else. And context is important. It can be mission critical, like payroll, but our customers willing to pay a premium for world-class payroll services for their suppliers' employees. Probably not, right? So that is definitely context, but critical, right? A critical capability, but not core. So that was kind of the thinking behind the 5 ideals.
Yeah, I'm glad you enumerated them. I just realized too that we've been saying the words, DevOps frequently, but it doesn't mean that everybody who's reading or listening will understand. So we should probably, if I can ask you to define that.
Yeah, in the DevOps handbook that came out in 2016, we framed it as a set of architectural, technical, and cultural norms, practices and cultural norms that enable organizations to deliver, application services quickly, that enables innovation and the fastest possible delivery of value to customers, while preserving world-class reliability, security, and stability. And why is that important? Is that so we can survive and win in the marketplace. Yeah. But there's a version of there's a definition I like even more, which came from John Smart. He's a partner at Deloitte. Before that, he was head of Better Ways of Working at Barclays, founded in the year 1634. And he said, it is all about better value, sooner, safer, happier. It's like, I wish I could have invented that. I'm not smart enough, but that is brilliant. I mean, I think it is unquestionable that the goal is better value, sooner, safer, happier.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that it's interesting that you've put a wrapper to be the ideals put a wrapper on things from organizational development work, from lean UX, from the DevOps environment, from, good heavens, Fifth Discipline,
Oh yeah, right.
Peter Senge, Humble Inquiry by Edgar Schein. These are, I could rattle off
Yeah.
all of the thought leadership on principles and ideals that will make it go. And it's interesting too that I would have to say that there's so much in this in the ideals that have to do with human interaction, almost more than technical expertise or particular algorithms or things like that. So what made you come to that? Where did you get that realization that you needed to focus on those things?
Well, I mean, I think it's certainly informed by our common experience that, greatness does require great teams, and great teams requires trust. And so that's something that we explored in the Phoenix project as well, but it's also studying that DevOps enterprise community. It's interesting you mentioned that corpus of work, whether it was Senge or Shine or, I would throw in there Cotter and, the whole dynamic learning organizations frame. My personal favorite is Dr. Steven Spear, and the frame he uses is dynamic learning organizations. And here's the context that I approach it in, is that there's a researcher, her name is Dr. Carlotta Perez. She wrote this amazing book called Financial Capital and Technical Revolutions. And kind of her notable contribution is that, she recognized, she points out there's kind of 50, there's 5 economic cycles we've been through in the past 250 years. And they're almost always caused by some mode of production being rapidly diminished in cost. And that causes cycle, right? A speculation period of immense innovation and fueled by financial capital, a bust that leads to a period of intense intense re-regulation. And then what usually happens is a 30 to 50 year golden age where all those novel methods of production are now being used and employed in this field, not by financial capital, but production capital. And so if you look back 100 years ago and with the revolution of mass manufacturing, there were 300 car startups in Detroit. But so a lot of wealth was created there, but the real wealth was created after World War II, not by the automobile, but that in combination with the interstate highway system and the ability to revolutionize supply chains, right? And the creation of Walmart. I mean, that is, that led to the greatest economic expansion the world has ever seen. And I think we're seeing that again with the age of software and data, is that, sure, we've created trillions of dollars of wealth with the Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, Googles, Microsoft, and so forth. But the real wealth will be created, not by them, but by every industry vertical adopting those norms, right? And so, sorry, just to get to the point, right? Each one of those revolutions creates a new mode of management. Subcontracting, Taylorism, Fordism, and I think most technology organizations, most IT organizations, they are in a Tayloristic mode of management. Leaders define the goals, they decompose the work, they parse out the work, they put compliance programs in place to make sure that the work is executed properly, right? And no wonder outcomes aren't so good, because that's not so great for highly technical, creative work.
Yes.
And so the question then becomes, what is the box that will replace Fordism and Taylorism?
Right.
And I think it's dynamic learning organizations. So I think that corpus of work that you pointed to is absolutely what will inform it. And I think it is being pioneered by software organizations. And so kind of this, I just have a lot of certainty that over the next 50 years, this will be how every organization works. We'll be having daily stand-ups, and we need networks of people who can work informally, not dictated by the org chart, right? This is how we have fully support innovation at the edges, but fully supported by core, right? And so I think this is kind of so that matters a lot, right? And so technology is important, but I think, it is dwarfed by this new way of working that unfortunately not enough organizations have been exposed to, have fully embraced, and are deploying throughout their organization. I mean, I have to imagine that resonates with your own experiences and beliefs.
Well, very much so. And I would, my yes and for that is that, these type of organizations, they're also going to shift because of the speed of information, that they become focused around, I will call it creativity, number
Yep.
one, right? That technology is, the nuts and bolts of technology is being replaced by creativity, as it were,
Yep.
right? And then secondly, that the organizations are now going to have to take over and become the learning institutions that we separated learning, right? We separated the acquisition and development of knowledge when we went into machine age, where everything was broken down to little parses and you only had to do, 3 steps. So our educational system was broken out,
Yep.
and the workers went there and so on and so forth. But just the way that these type of organizations have to work in order to produce value, there is so much knowledge and synthesis that has to happen on the spot.
Yep.
That they're going to have to replace that mode of teaching and learning, so that it becomes inculcated directly within the process of work, I think. But that's
I know, absolutely. And I think that the book Team of Teams by General Stanley McChrystal was just a stunning demonstration of that, right? It's like, this is about the story of the Joint Task Force for beating Al-Qaeda in Iraq, 2004. And they were being soundly beaten by a much smaller, much nimbler adversary.
Right.
And so generally the story is like, what does it take? We have technical superiority, we have numerical superiority. Why are we losing? Why can't we achieve the mission? Why can't we preserve the safety and security of the citizens we are tasked to protect? And there was this unflinching view of there's something about the way we organize ourselves that's leading to profoundly bad outcomes. And, I think people in DevOps and Agile, they'll sort of recognize, they push decision-making downstream. They allowed the cross-collaboration and information sharing. And it was just this kind of wonderful, it was just a dazzling story of, how they were able to achieve the mission they were tasked with. And, I think the equivalent book in the commercial side is this book called Transforming Nokia by Risto Salasma, right? Describing, just how that sort of culture is being deployed at in the last stage of Nokia, but led to probably the best outcome you could hope for. Like a company that was 60 days away from bankruptcy still managed to be acquired by Microsoft for $7.2 billion. I mean, it's just amazing, right? It takes a lot of skill and planning, both in planning and execution. And then, how they've, quintupled market share in this kind of new market they're going after. And it's just kind of a very similar story, but, in a commercial context. And I just think it just sort of shows where every one of us are going. So I think we're leaving the world of Cotter, Senge, and others. And I think this is now showing how this is now being applied at industrial scales. And that to me is so exciting.
Yeah. I just saw an interesting company that's setting themselves up as a VC just dedicated to remote work.
Mm-hmm.
That's the only thing they want to invest in is remote work. And I was looking at the kinds of, I'm going to get the leader of this to have a talk, because I want to see the kinds of companies he thinks are relevant for that, and I want to see how much of it is going to put this same kind of mix together. Where their thinking is all aligned with that kind of thing, because the flattening organization and the being, are we on site? Are we, all of that, starts to get wiped away with the technology capabilities. And then what are we left with? How do we need to form a team at all?
But and teams are important, right? I mean, it has been said over 100 years, right, that the team is the most powerful unit of economic value creation.
Mm-hmm.
But I think what we're figuring out now is like, how do we truly unleash the creativity of everyone in a team, right? And how do we actually get a team of teams to work, to achieve grand goals and get them to operate in a way where, it's not a mob of teams. It's actually a team of teams. By the way, one of my favorite lines from General Stanley McChrystal's book was because they were dealing with elite special forces. So they were the best teams on the planet, but the team was the boundary of which everyone else sucked. So it was, Delta Force believed that everybody else sucked. The SEAL teams thought everybody else sucked. Right?
Yes.
And it took this incredibly mindful sort of cross-population, cross-training, collaboration to even get these people to trust each other. And then you throw in the intelligence agencies, which like no one liked them. They were just a bunch of people who sat behind desks in Washington, D.C. to fully integrate them into teams. I mean, it was just it was such an inspiring set of stories, and it was just such a fun read. And boy, it's like my copy is also like yours, right? Post-it notes everywhere.
yeah. I've done work with military, and I've had conversations with military leadership about the structure and the emotional makeup of where people stand and how they relate to one another within the hierarchy, that rigid hierarchy. And the secondary piece of the conversation is then how difficult it is to move into all of this kind of thinking because of that hierarchical culture.
In fact, maybe just geek out for a moment. So in the Unicorn Project, there's this kind of Maxine joins a rebellion, and I think the reason why Maxine needs Kurt, right, is Kurt is just so savvy at navigating the organization, right? He seems to be able to make friends everywhere because he's always doing favors, right? He's kind of he knows kind of how the system works and kind of knows what he can get away with. He'll find every loophole to go through, and I think to exactly what you said, I think to cite another kind of authority, right? Dr. John Cotter. There's a great book he wrote called Accelerate, XLR8. And, he brings up the notion of the second operating system. So the first operating system is the formal organization as defined by the org chart. But, his kind of take on learning organizations is that, to get to be innovative, you have to overlay onto it this much more powerful second operating system that are the informal networks, the relationships, when I need help, I can reach out to whatever because I did him or her a favor 2 years ago, right? And the people who can best mobilize that network, right? They're the ones that will be the winners. And the reason why is that they know how to work and create the second operating system, which I just I read it too late to introduce that terminology, but when I read it, I was like, oh yes, that's it.
I had forgotten that, but yes, it's ironic. That's sort of in the back of my mind, but yes. What can I say? It's not a but yes, actually. It's yes and as it were, but
and it's exciting.
I get to employ that, and it's very interesting. Just a quick thing that I just saw this in the last couple of weeks. That here we are, those of us in this sort of design thinking, innovative world. We all go yes and yes and yes and then the borderline that you just mentioned. So the product manager's borderline is the product manager's line is his job is essentially to say, but no.
Right.
So here's the poor product, right? Or the product owner who's supposed to be making the confining limits. Because you do have to set limits, right? You have to,
and you need to constrain, right? It's like constraints are important, right? You can't yes and all the time. I agree.
Right. So I just wanted to mention there is that in there, and then you do bring that out, but it's you put it in a more polite way than saying the no but guy is important. So I want to sort of get to my last question, which is, as I say, my great fascination, love of visual thinking, and I don't even know if that's a proper term anymore, but the whole point of being able to use these very natural faculties that we have, the way that we process and absorb and synthesize information. And for me, as I say, so much of what I do is based on using visual templates or kinesthetic materials in order to engage the eyes and the hands and the body to think and process and synthesize, and more often than not to break locked in thinking and so on and so forth. And you didn't necessarily mention any of the kind of methodologies that I would use, but I was just wondering if there are things that you think are very relevant within a company that wants to become, move into the way of working the Unicorn Project or the Phoenix Project worked. Favorite things of yours that could be called sort of visual thinking tools, and even just the Kanban board is the most common thing probably.
So I'm going to give you kind of an oblique answer, but
Okay.
I mentioned it only just because it had kind of a profound sort of impact on me. And so I was listening to Dr. Andre Martin. He was chief learning officer at Nike, then Target, and now he's VP of People Dev at Google.
Oh.
And we were talking about flow and workplace engagement, and the question he posed everywhere just kind of blew my mind. So, and in my mind, this is like all about focus, flow, and joy, the second ideal. He said, what every leader should be asking, their people, and we should all ask ourselves, is like, what is our ideal environment where we, what is think of a time when you had that state of flow, where you were firing on every cylinder, that you were achieving things that you didn't even think possible, whether it was by yourself or within a team, right? What was that like? Right? It kind of triggers a whole bunch of questions. Like, what was the environment? What was the project? What was the activity? Who are you surrounded by? Right? And yeah, I think that is a powerful question, right? Just because it's going to be different for everybody, but ultimately, kind of like a fractal. This matters at every level, right? It matters from the individual level, right? Because that's kind of the state I want to be in all the time. Right. That means, and that should dictate what I'm working on, what my role is, et cetera. At the team level, you want to be able to create that for as many people or all the people within the team, right? To unleash everyone's best genius. And then certainly at the, as you go to the highest level of the organization, I have no doubt that who will win in the age of dynamic learning organizations is who is best able to deploy and create these contexts where people can be at their creative best, right? At the edges. In fact, I think that's the story that's being told by Satya Nadella at Microsoft, right? Is this, hitting refresh. That's to me, it's obvious that this is about sense of mission. It's about engagement. It's about deployment of those and reinforcing that at every level of the organization. And maybe it's no surprise that they are the world's most valuable company. So yeah, your question was like, which ideal would I gravitate towards and what kind of exercises seem relevant to me? It really is about, think of a time that you actually performed at your best, that was the most fun, most creative. I think that is a surprisingly and a provocative question that I think is actually profoundly important.
Okay. And so where do you stand with that today? That's a personal question. That's a good way to close, right? Yeah. Because I'm asking you to future think, I think, in a way too. And I think that's...
Oh, look at my body language. I'm like, look at this wistful.
Oh, how good.
Yeah. For me, for a good month, for me, a great month is when I spend half the time writing and half the time hanging out with the best in the game, of which this is certainly one of those, right? You're getting to kind of rub elbows and smash thoughts together that evoke joy and connections. And then there's actually 20% that I would reserve for coding. 3 years ago, I learned a functional programming language called Clojure that runs in the JVM. And I wrote this 9,000 word article. It was called Love Letter to Clojure. And it was probably one of the most I've never had like people jump on something I've written ever. It's like 25,000 views in like less than a week. And I was just describing like what I learned and how much fun I'm having building things to solve problems I want to solve. And that's actually heavily informed the Unicorn Project, right? It's really that, like Maxine is a developer, right? She wants to liberate other developers because she knows what you can do and what humans can do. And so for me, it's hanging out with the best in the game, trying to synthesize and get that on paper so other people can have those aha moments and ideally result in sticky notes on pages, right? To me, that's so rewarding. And also have 20% of my time personally experiencing, the act of creating and solving problems I want to solve and with no audience at all. I have one person I care about, and that's me. Right. And so I just, those are the things that lead to this kind of very wistful smile I have on my face.
That's great. That's great. I have no more questions because I feel very satisfied and filled with your answers and very inspired as I have with the book. So I want to thank you for
Oh no, likewise, and thank you for the opportunity and these incredible connections you're making for me. And I would just love to offer my gratitude and a huge high five.
Here we go.